Okay, let's take a look at this sculpture book I've got my hands on by H.D. Molesworth. I guess his family was worth their weight in moles. It's a strange name. And we have Romanesque to, what is it? To Rodin. Man, they're giving Rodin a whole genre there, a whole epoch. I'm not really interested in him. I'm interested in the Romanesque and Gothic and late Gothic and Renaissance. Actually, I'm interested in everything pretty much up until him. That's why I got the book. These are the interesting characters you get in the medieval period, Gothic period. That's a nice little character. It's weird. You get a sense of there is like a sense of humour in some of the medieval and Gothic, whatever you want to call it, pre-Renaissance work at times that you don't see after a while. Maybe they're just happier. Look at this. That is actually interesting, despite looking like an alien life form. I mean, it's still done with some style. It's a head turner anyway. Gotta get my camera back here. I'm always too close. That's whalebone. Carved in whalebone. Yeah, I never like relief much. Oh, that Church of Ernest, Norway, I've seen that before. There's some very interesting carving there. So, non-naturalistic, super stylized. I'd say, what would you call it? I mean, that's the zoological style, but they have some really interesting designs from that period. It's sort of like if you go from the super stylized period, non-naturalistic period, you get, I think, some great, just some great pieces, great designs. And then there's this awkward, although I have to say the people are often not very pleasing. But you go through this awkward period of naturalism that's not quite right, not quite, I guess, good enough. And then you get to the end of it and you get, well-produced, at least semi-naturalistic pieces. For example, I mean, you get to the period where you're getting well-designed pieces. It's not super realism, but there's just an awkward period in between that. That's what I'm getting at. it's not that there's nothing good in this little period, this sector I'm talking about, but you can get some very strange things happening. And of course a lot of stumpy people, as I've mentioned. So when I look at medieval or Gothic, even into the Renaissance, I like to look for unique stylizations of features and forms that you start to lose once you get into full naturalism. Can't really see what's happening there. I think it was eaten away. So we'll be getting some repetition from the other book because it's a similar era and location. So that's walrus ivory. I don't like it, but it's interesting that it's walrus. This is a pretty good piece, I think. Mid 13th century. I remember these. Remember that fellow? That one's... Is that ivory? No, that's ivory. On the left. We're entering the late Gothic. And the behaviour of people is very similar throughout history, where in every era people look back and think they're superior to everybody and everything that came before them, and so that's why we have the term Gothic. So everything before the Renaissance was basically barbaric, let's say broadly speaking, for a lot of these intellectuals. Well, do you think this is this a barbaric, low-grade piece of art? That's a great piece. Mid-15th century. Okay, it's pretty close to Renaissance, but the idea that everything that comes before is just inferior is what we see now as well, obviously. And the difference is that there were improvements made in terms of in certain areas, in certain technical areas, when these people were diminishing medieval work, so they made naturalistic improvements. But what you see these days is you have people disparaging old-fashioned culture, but they're not making any improvements, they're just degenerating. old-fashioned style and methods, but they just degenerate now. So, but it's the same basic mentality that whatever's further on the timeline is better, and we just dismiss everything before it. So maybe it's a unique form of self-righteousness that Europeans have. The European stock, I mean by that. The bio stock. I always have to get into politics, don't I? Well, that's how I think. So even when I try not to, it just seeps out. So we're entering the Renaissance. See if I can turn the page here. The reason is this is actually quite thick, this paper, unlike the Dover book I had the other day, which apparently had fine, thick paper. This is genuinely thick paper. I think I might have some statuettes by this guy on my computer. I believe I do. Ooh, something went wrong there. This one interested me. This was because it's I've got a picture of I've got a few views of this one, but it's you can still see the working into the wax in various parts. The book is fighting against me now. Michael got a fresco in here, which is he was given the honour. It's supposed to be a sculpture book, but Sansovino, he does some great ones. Even though I wouldn't mind if you put some pants on some of these guys, but don't underestimate how some pants can improve a male figure. From my point of view anyway. Okay, so here's Cellini, who was I won't go into his life too much. I really like this Perseus. But unfortunately Cellini was a complete deviant and really just he's just an unfortunate case of someone with a lot of talent who happens to be basically evil. So it's a shame. It happens quite a bit. He'd probably be celebrated these days for his antics. And people can look that up themselves. I'm not going to get into that. I've already done enough. Trying to keep some of these unpleasant realities out of my flip throughs, but unfortunately, when you're dealing with real life and real people and artists and so on, famous Bernini piece there. I guess they're all famous. I do have a Bernini, I think a PDF of a book that I might go through. Here's a funny biography as well. Well, Cellini's isn't funny, but it's Bernini would be in a little bit of trouble these days, but for a different reason. Oh, hang on, no. Cellini wouldn't be in trouble. Cellini wouldn't be in trouble, and Bernini would be. Although with in Cellini's case, yeah, see, I'm getting into it. But the point is that it is difficult to separate people's behaviour from their artistic work. I find it hard. If I don't like people, I find it hard to enjoy their work, and it's just how it is. This book was treating me so well with the turning until halfway through when it started to fight me. And now it won't stay put. because it knows we're coming to the end and doesn't want it to end. Very narcissist book. Narcissistic. I guess all books are really. It's all about they want everyone to give them their full attention and be completely consumed. Well, maybe not coffee table books. They accept people aren't paying attention too much. That's a great name, Hans Krumper. Hans Krumper. Ah, it's a shame that was the polychrome. But we've got it in black and white. So the Spanish polychrome interests me as well. And it's a little bit of a niche, I guess, in terms of how sculpture is, European sculpture is covered. I've got some work by her. She was a daughter of a famous sculptor, and then she became relatively famous as well, which goes against some of the myths we're told about certain things. And the good news is that she had talent, and she had a lot of children, so she passed that on. And that's not. She has a lot of clays, a lot of terracottas that are very well done. She does very nice faces. See, back in the old days, people with intelligence and talent used to have large families in the European biostock, and that's how you actually maintain a high level or increase the level. But we're too advanced for that now, so too progressive for that. So people are going to find out in the future the cost of doing that. Of basically neutering yourselves. Oh, I'm back into politics. But direct comparison with Louisa back there. If you propagate your qualities, then you will spread them throughout a settlement. And if you don't, they'll disappear. You can't create certain things out of. You can't just create them with conditions. If you believe that, you're a fool. It's basically, and it's basically dependent on traits. It's not magic. So now we're getting up into Scandinavia. I held off on the politics for a good 5 minutes. And I was triggered by Louisa. I like this pose, but I don't. This is a bit weird. Virtue overcoming vice. I've got a few things to say about that, but I'm not going to say them. So now we've reached Rodin. Oh, this guy is interesting. So he's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, actually. He was Jamido was some kind of, he was in the slums, I think. Now, I have a theory of how he came about, but I won't go into it. I think there was probably some visitation into some certain areas by some artists and let's say more capable people, and he ended up being created, and he didn't have any help in terms of development programs or whatever. He actually he showed some ability, somehow was used in an artist's workshop. He was some kind of assistant or whatever, and he showed ability, and he was trained up in that workshop, and he became actually a successful sculptor in the end. In other words, he came from a very low position, and still he had ability. The ability didn't come through education. It came because he had it, and he was given an opportunity through this workshop. However, it was based on his merit. He wasn't created by a system. He clearly had inherent ability, and even in those times he got somewhere because he demonstrated ability, and then he developed it through the workshop system, which people don't like to talk about because it's inconvenient in the era of TED Talks and global so-called development and the cult of education systems and conditioning systems and whatever. The fact is that people used to learn their trades in workshops of all kinds, and it was effective for many things. Not for everything, but it was effective for many things. And everyone acts like nobody had education before public education systems, but it's a lie. They were educated in things that were useful, and they didn't try and turn everybody in the population into an intellectual or an academic, because the reality is, even in the European population, the majority of people aren't capable of that. So you're wasting their time, basically. Wasting everybody's time. Oh, we're back into some interesting topics, but in these periods, and that guys, that's the 19th century, right? Because public education wasn't widespread everywhere in the so-called West. There, I mean, I'm not sure exactly when it came in, but it's around that time there was a lot of movement there. But all these people, they trained in a workshop system and apprentice system, which was very effective, and in many ways was more effective because you came out as a teenager. I mean, you went into these things as a teenager or a certain age, or pubescent type, adolescent age, maybe a bit younger, and you were fast-tracked. And even better, if your family had a workshop of some kind, then you would have direct access, and you could build on that. There are many of these sculptors and so on had family workshops. So, for example, even Louisa, she was in a family workshop with her father, and all the children learned how to be sculptors and or something to do with that craft, with that art and that industry. And it's actually a good system in many ways, but you don't have that anymore. I mean, even if you're talking about the arts, just forget everything else. If you want, where are you gonna go? Let's say you show artistic ability, or in the past you would be sent to a workshop to be trained up as, maybe 12, 13, 14 years old. That would be your schooling, and you would learn the trade, and you would learn how to operate as a professional. Now you got to go through all this ridiculous schooling that's got nothing to do with what you'll ever do. Pay a lot of money, and even if the conservatory systems were effective, they've all failed now because they've all been modernized and degenerated in the arts, particularly in visual art. But even if that wasn't the case, you're still going through a very inefficient system in many cases. But definitely these days it's completely useless. You could come out and be completely ill prepared, and they'll tell you that that they've educated you, and you are so educated compared to these ignorant people, these barbarians, right? To touch on the idea of everything being better and disparaging the past. They'll tell you, look, you're so much more educated than these people, these savages, barbarians, these gothic people. I can guarantee you they had, if you're talking about sculpting, these people had better skills, better visual art skills, better technical skills than everyone in standard visual art programs who are in their 20s. These people would have those skills much younger. There are a few select places in Europe now you can get more of a traditional technical schooling in some of these areas, but they're niche. They're not the standard university programs. It's just it is. I'm just pointing out a laughable narrative that everyone was so ignorant before, but you look at what they were doing, and often doing impressive things at a young age too, and you say, well, can you explain this to me? Was it all just magic? So just be I think it's good to be a little skeptical of the narrative that every system that we have is better than what we used to have, just because some crusaders installed it. It doesn't mean that it's better, or it doesn't mean that it's better in all ways. And if you're going to buy a sculpture book as well, you do want to pretty much stop at the 19th century. Not that there's nothing into the 20th century, but you pretty much want to stop at the 19th century. That's my advice. Because if you go any further, you're in for some truly awful and embarrassing productions. There's Molesworth. Look at that. He's a pretty happy guy. Victorian Albert Museum. I've downloaded quite a bit from their online site, but I don't like their politics these days, so I actually keep away from them. be honest. They have their little agendas on their site now. I've just come here to download some old artifacts. I don't need your little posturing slogans. So see, I mean, I try to keep these things out, but they keep getting brought up. I mean, I was just going to comment on Molesworth there. Victorian Albert Museum came up. But back in these days, it was probably slightly different. What we're talking about here, this is $1965. Well, just before just before the so-called Cultural Revolution. At least one of them. There were a few more that predated that. Well, I think I will finish now.